Hello, Peter Forsana0 here, Cyrus, and welcome to my review for Muramasa, the Demon Blade. Well, transitioning from my ArcLad review, the next overlooked title that I want to look at is, well, this game. Okay, it's not that overlooked with it getting a pretty good reception at launch, but I do find that Muramasa, the Demon Blade isn't all well known as the years went by. Well, less known. So I decided to go review this game since, well, I do plan on reviewing a couple overlooked titles like how I did with ArcLad, and this game come to mind, well, after ArcLad. So without further interruption, let's begin. Muramasa, the Demon Blade is a 2D side-scrolling action RPG that was developed by Vanillaware and published by Ignition in North America, Rising Star Games in Europe, and Marvelous in Japan. It is available on Nintendo Wii, though I heard that it might be a Vita port for the game later on. Visually, the game is absolutely stunning. The 2D character sprite artwork for both the main characters, the NPC you encounter when you're going through the game, and the enemy looks visually appealing and detailed. The backdrop looks absolutely beautiful. The weapon models also look pretty good, and the special effects are absolute eye candy. The artwork in this game is just breathtaking, especially with the heavy influences of Japanese folklore with the artwork. The animation is also pretty fluid, well, for my eyes anyway. Visually, Muramasa the Demon Blade is one of the best looking Wii games to date. Story-wise, the game has a dual storyline, which is kind of funny since the last game I reviewed also featured a dual storyline as well, with you playing as Momohime for one and Kisuke for the other. Momohime's story basically starts with her being possessed by a spirit that goes by the name of Jinkuro. Now, that's a pretty interesting start. Anyway, it seemed that Jinkuro was aiming to possess her fiancé, Yukinojo Yagyu? Sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name. I don't really know much Japanese, so I'm probably gonna mispronounce a lot in this review. So yeah. Anyway, it seems Momohime jumped in the last second, which got Jinkuro to accidentally possess Momohime instead of Yonjin Ojo, or Yangyu. Well, the two don't really like this arrangement, shall we say, with Momohime not liking her body being possessed by a spirit in general, and Jinkuro not liking the weak body he accidentally possessed. So the two sets out on a journey to find a way to separate Jinkuro from Momohime, since he apparently lost the sword that was used to do the possession in the first place, so that Momohime can be free from the spirit, and the spirit can wander around finding a suitable body. Kisuke's story is that he's an amnesiac and is suddenly attacked by a clan of ninjas. After dealing with the first patch of ninjas, he set out on a journey to try to recover his memories. And that's basically his story. But the two characters' fate is also linked by the Muramasas, which are swords that possess tremendous power, and is able to repair itself when it's in its sheath, but at the cost that it bestows upon its owner a deep bloodlust, which can only be tamed by the mastery of the Oboro style of fighting, which is the style that both these characters share. And that's basically it in a nutshell. So, what do I think of the story? Oh, I think Momohime's story is pretty decent and fun to play through, and I do enjoy the interaction between Momohime and Jinkuro. Though for Kisuke's story, I think it's okay. I don't particularly think his story is boring, but it's just pretty typical. The characters are decent. Again, I do like the interaction between Momohime and Jinkuro, which is probably the strongest characters in the game for me, while Kisuke isn't as interesting to them, but I do like his interaction with Torohime when you meet her later. The side characters are sadly not as interesting, and that's probably got to do with one thing. The translation for this game is kinda bland, and that's mostly got to do with how the translation basically just summarizes or paraphrases what the character is saying. Even though I only know a little bit of Japanese, which is basically just a few phrases, it's really easy to tell that the translation is just basically paraphrasing. And it's kinda hard to discern a character's unique quirk when the dialogue is just summarizing what the character is saying, which really hurts the side characters and make them sort of bland. The soundtrack is great as well, with the tracks comprising of traditional Japanese music that are really soothing at one point but also very ominous at another, and really fit the tone of the game. And there is some really epic battle tracks in the game as well. Overall, great soundtrack. Anyway, the voice acting is, well, I can't judge it since it's in Japanese and I don't understand a lick of the language outside of a few phrases. But if you still want to know what I think of the Japanese voice acting, regardless of me not knowing any Japanese at all, I think they're really good. The two casts are pretty well voiced, with Momohime being voiced by Miyuki Sawashiro and Kisuke being voiced by Hiroyuki Yoshino, and the side character is pretty well cast. But the star of the cast, in my opinion, is probably Miyuki Sawashiro, for her voicing Momohime as side A, being able to voice her as a sweet, innocent, princess-like character, to making a transition to voicing a tougher, more ruthless, more merciless character when Junkiro takes over Momohime's body. And I think Miyuki Sawashiro really does a great job making it sound natural with the transitions. But still, this opinion on the voice acting might not mean much since I don't really understand Japanese. So yeah. Though do note there is no English voice acting. Overall, the game got pretty good presentation with its absolutely stunning visual and art style, and the animation is pretty fluid. But the only thing holding it back is probably the overall translation of the game, and I guess the lack of an English dub can also be sort of seen as a con. Muramasa the Demon Blade plays out like a side-scrolling action RPG. In combat, you got a standard attack, use items, guard, running slash, jump, dodge, backslash, and secret art. Standard attack, item, guarding, jumping, and dodging should be self-explanatory. Backslash is like a charge attack, which you do when holding the A button when crouching. And running slash is like a dash attack, which you can do by holding the A button and pressing the control stick in which direction you want the running slash attack to go to, which is mostly left or right. And you can do the running slash attack like 3 times in a row. There is also the secret art mechanic, which you use in order to unleash the special attack that your sword possesses by pressing B. But do note that you will have a variety of Muramasas at your disposal, which means you will have access to a good amount of variety of special attacks when you're going through the game. But do note that special attacks, and also guarding against enemy attack or deflecting their projectiles, will use up the soul power gauge of the Muramasa, which is shown at the top of the screen, and if the soul power gauge is depleted fully, the Muramasa will break, which might spell disaster for you. But it isn't a total catastrophe, as your Muramasa will heal itself if you change to another sword. Eventually. You also have 2 sort of sword styles you can use, which is the katana and longsword. Katana is pretty your standard sword attack, while longswords basically serve as your two-handed sword weapons. So yeah. And the last thing I talk about regarding to the combat is the quick draw mechanic. It's basically an attack that activates when you switch your weapon, well, switching to another weapon, which will create an attack that will hit all the enemies in the screen. Though do note that you have to wait a while to do another quick draw, which is signified with the weapon flashing. Overall, I think the combat in Muramasa the Demon Blade is really fun and satisfying. The combat is quick, it's very satisfying pulling off combo with the standard attack / secret art, and there is a variety of special attacks since you do get a lot of Muramasas in your arsenal as you go through the game, from the forge or even from bosses. And there is depth to it with the soul power gauge, with you having to pay attention to how much abuse your weapon can take, whether from guarding from enemy attack or from you using secret art over and over again. And this might be seen kinda shallow, but I love the quick draw mechanic just because I really like the Yojutsu practitioner trope in general, which basically means a character that rely on drawing and attacking with one move. Sorta like Kenshin's Amaken Ryu no Hirameki attack from Rurouni Kenshin, or Asbo's expunging sword mystic art from Tales of Grace's F. I just love those swords attacks, so seeing the quick draw mechanic in this game is just tons of fun for me to use. There is also a good amount of enemy variety, and the boss battles are just awesome. So in the end, I really did have a great time playing through Muramasa the Demon Blade's combat system, but I do have a few problems with it. That's probably got to do with mostly with the controls. Yeah, you got the usual complaint with the up button being jump, which is a bit jarring, but I also find that how the standard attack, running slash, backslash, and guarding is all key to the A button. Now, I don't really have much of a problem with standard attack, running slash, and backslash being all tied to one button, which is A, but I find the addition of the guard button being also the A button to be a bit jarring, as I would sometimes do a backslash instead of a guard, or a guard instead of a backslash. So yeah, but this is a nitpick and I got used to it very quickly. Another thing I'm iffy on. Now, this is more of a disappointment than a negative quality, but that thing is, Momohime and Kisuke pretty much have the same playstyle, albeit one side has more emphasis on long swords while the other side has more emphasis on katanas, but their fighting style is pretty similar. And what I do know, there's a story reason for this, with them using the Boro style, which is pretty necessary to use the Muramasa in the first place. I do find it odd that the game uses a dual protagonist story for this game, when the characters don't really fight that differently. Still, it's not a bad thing. I just thought the game would provide a more distinct style for Momohime and Kisuke when I saw that this game was going to have a dual protagonist story. But regardless, the combat is tons of fun to play through, even with my nitpicks. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is the leveling system and the customization. The leveling system is pretty standard in that you get experience from defeating enemies, and when you get enough, you level up. The customization is good with the forge system as well. The forge is basically a skill tree of sorts, but instead of getting skills, you get swords slash Muramasas from souls you get, whether you get the souls from defeating enemies or eating food, strangely enough. There's also some souls littered around certain areas when you're first going through them, and sometimes you have to do platforming in order to get some souls. So yeah. Anyway, I think the customization is pretty good with forge system since, well, most of the swords you get through each weapon tree does feel pretty different from each other, which does give you incentive to try to use them. And the forge system also give you a good feeling of progression when going down a skill tree as well, as it gets more stronger and stronger. There is also a cooking system, which is a pretty standard cooking system, where you get the ingredients for the food, and where you also get the recipe, bam, you can create that food. But I do like one addition of the food system in general in this game, when it's not really particularly linked to the cooking system, and that's the fullness mechanic. The fullness mechanic is basically a gauge that determines that if you can keep consuming food, and if it's full, you can't consume any more food until it's empty. I do like how this mechanic tried to balance item use, which does add to the overall gameplay of Muramasa the Demon Blade. Kinda like how the Tale series balanced item use with the 20 item limit and the small time limit where you can't use an item after just using one. Exploration wise, it's a bit lacking here. Oh, don't get me wrong, there is tons to explore here. The problem is, there isn't really much incentive to do so, since there's basically no side quests and most of the areas is pretty empty as well. Well, in a gameplay's point of view. Visually, well, they're stunning, so there might be incentive to just explore just to see the areas. But still, there's one thing that can be seen more negatively when talking about the exploration in this game. The backtracking. Oh man, there's tons of backtracking in this game. So yeah. Likewise, it took me about 20 to 25 hours to do everything in the game, including multiple endings. And I did it on the Shura difficulty. And speaking of difficulty, there's two difficulty modes to pick from when you start, which is Muso and Shira. Though I would probably pick Shira since Muso is pretty easy. There's also additional difficulty available when you beat the game, which might also give you incentive to play the game again. Overall, Muramasa the Demon Blade is tons of fun to play through. The combat's fast paced, got definite with the soul power mechanic, kick draw mechanic, etc. And it's very satisfying, and the boss battles are awesome. There is a few things that can sour the experience, like backtracking, but still, the game is loads of fun to play through. Overall, Muramasa the Demon Blade is just a great experience overall. The presentation is great, with its absolutely stunning visuals, great music, and the story overall is decent. The gameplay is tons of fun to play through, with the combat system being tons of fun to play through and being very satisfying, the customization being pretty good. I do like how the gameplay try to balance item use with the bonus meter, even if that just applies to the food material and not healing items in general. There are a few stuff that can drag the experience, like the bland translation, controls being a bit iffy at the start, and the backtracking. But judging it as a whole, it's probably one of my favorite Nintendo Wii games. If you ever see it, I say check it out. Though I have heard that the Vita port is coming, and for what I've seen of it from screenshots, it looks even better, with the visuals getting upgrade from SE to HD and a new translation even. So I say Vita players should also check out Muramasa Rebirth when it comes out on the Vita, since the original Wii version is such a blast to go through. Though, this is just mainly speculation and the Vita port might actually be worse. Let's hope not.